I'm not going to make a huge introduction, same thing as we did in the morning. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Mirella Lapata from the University of Edinburgh. So the floor is yours, Mirella.
Thank you. Can I see here how many of you went to the structure prediction workshop? No one?
No. This is like 2 days.
2 days. Oh, that's why they haven't been. Okay. Shame. Okay. All right. Hello. These people want to sit down, or should I wait for them? It's okay, I should start. Right, so the title of the talk is Prompting is Not All You Need. And when I gave this talk for the first time, somebody said to me, your title is ambiguous. And it's on purpose. You can, let's see by the end of the talk how you think that I meant the title to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in NLP/AI today. And what research you can do in this field, and why, in my opinion, prompting is not all you need. Okay, so how many of you have seen this movie? Okay, very good, excellent, but much better than a structured prediction. So this is a movie. It started as an indie movie anyway. It went to the Oscars, big deal. Some people love it, some people hate it. Critics particularly love it. Anyway, so there is this woman here, Michelle, this is her real name, and she has to be in multiple universes all at once to save her life and her family's life, and wherever she goes, she sees versions of herself, how she might have been and whatnot. And I feel like nowadays we are in the same kind of universe with language models being everywhere, everything all at once. And it is so bad that my actual neighbor, my next door neighbor, knows about LLMs, and when I go out of my house to go to my work, he goes like, hey Mirella, how are you? What about ChatGPT? And I go like, what do you mean? And so they want me to give them actually explanations about ChatGPT. And then there's the press, and then they read about the stuff that I say in the press, and they go like, oh, I read about your article, very good. And I mean, I talk nonsense, but anyway, so it's everywhere all at once. And in case you were wondering, this is a graph that shows the number of language models released throughout a year. And this is, we start February 23, and we go up to February 24, and there is no space to continue up to now. I mean, I would have to squash the graph too much, but you can see this is almost normally distributed. There is an increased trend, and you can see by color whether the models are open or closed. Closed, you don't get any weights. Open, you get some weights, you can play with them. There is no truly open language model except for Olmo, which you can play with everything. And even the open ones are really closed because we don't know how they trained them and what prompts they used. But you can see, and this is encouraging, there is more green than blue here. Okay, so what sizes do we get to play with? This is again the same year spanning January 23rd to February 24, and you can see I've grouped them into 4 sizes. So we have the large ones, more than 100 billion parameters, and then we have medium ones like the 70B and upwards, small ones 30B, extra small 10B, and I'm saying these things, 10 billion parameters is not a small model. And I've classified it here as extra small, okay? And then the nano, the babies, 2 billion. So everything we did like last year, almost like, you know, T5 and BART and BERT, they're all nano these days. And the trends here, if you can squint at this graph, you'll see that blue is the most popular color. And this is something we see nowadays. The smallish models are the ones we use and play with in the 7 to 8, 9 billion range. And I think this is not because like we all like these models. These are the models that we can actually run in company and academic settings. Okay, so who builds these language models? Look at this graph. Again, the same year span. There is a lot of orange here. Orange are companies, and the blue is non-profit organizations. So if academics have lost the game, they cannot actually create these language models. We just take them when they're released. Okay, and as you might have guessed, if everything is about LLMs, then there is a lot of research on LLMs. And again, this is the proportion of papers with language model or prompt in their title, and the same year span. And you see that, for example, EMNLP and ACL and EACL had a healthy proportion of prompt in the title. And I looked at ACL, which just happened in August, and it's again similar to ACL 23, same proportion here. And this is an underestimate because, of course, I cannot write all the scripts to go inside the papers and look as to whether they mention prompt and whatever. So it's a lower bound. I think the upper bound would be more in the region of like 60%. And iClear, which is conventionally a machine learning conference, but now everything is the same, everything is everywhere all at once, it's catching up. Not so, yeah, from 23 to 24. Okay, and there is a conference dedicated to language models called the Conference on Language Models. Now, I don't know how long this conference will be there for, because if language models stop being the thing, then what will the conference be? I don't know. But anyway, there is this conference, it's taking place in October. You can go and attend. And there is this week in NLP, there is this blog by this NLP, former professor Robert Dale. And if you really want to get, I do recommend this blog. It tells you what happens in a week in NLP, but it's not so much about NLP. It's like which company fights what and what latest GPUs they have released, and he calls them like LLM wars. And if you're into gossip, this is the thing to read. I don't have time, but when I read it, it's actually quite entertaining. Okay, so, but it's not only the fact that the LLMs are here and that, you know, companies release them and we play with them. The point is that for the first time in forever, NLP has actual users. And this hit us like by a storm. We did not expect this. We used to do like algorithms and things, and the user was like this dream. Oh, I have a dream. Somebody might at some point use my stuff. Now there are actual users, real people, and we have to deal with them. Yeah, and for somebody like me, where the users are like, yeah, there's users. Yes, they have actual needs, and there's actual issues with them. So this graph shows how long it took from the time an app or a tool was launched to be taken up by 100 million users, okay? And this is a very interesting graph because you see there Google Translate. It took 78 months. This is more than 3 years. And Google Translate is almost 20 years old now. Uber, the same. TikTok was 9 months, and ChatGPT managed to be faster than TikTok, which is like visual and trendy, and lots of children use it, so, you know, they had a lot more users, and within 2 months, they reached 100 million users. I don't know how many they have now. Okay, so, like I said, the point of the talk here is to convince you that there is more to NLP than LLMs. And in fact, what is becoming apparent is that we have an ecosystem of things that help us do our research. So I have this picture here. You can think of the ecosystem in different ways. This is just an abstraction. So we have in the center the LLM, okay, with our prompt engineering. Remember, prompting is not all you need, but there is prompt engineering. And the protective guardrails here for the users, you know. You have to respect their identity and whatnot. And then there is a lot of stuff going on around the LLM, such as, for example, some memory. If you wanted to chat with you, you might as well keep track of the conversation. You cannot be forgetting what the user has told you. Then we may have access to an external knowledge base. If you're a company, you have access to proprietary information that you do not necessarily want to give to everybody. So there has to be a back-end knowledge base or a very huge knowledge graph that actually doesn't fit in your language model. Then if we have things that do with code and we execute the code, we have to have a code execution engine that gives you some answers and then you do things with it. And then we have dialogue flows, and around all of this we may have to do fine-tuning if we have the compute or if we have a smaller model. And of course we have to worry about evaluation, which is another like big deal. How do you evaluate these models? Okay, so in addition to all of that, there may be specific things that you need to do for which you have specific tools. And these are other models that are not actually part of your big fat LLM, but contribute either input or take output from this. And so you have a very healthy ecosystem of things to play with. In addition, we have Hugging Face, which has made a huge service to the community. And all the stuff is there. You can download it, you can play with it. So this is all part of the ecosystem. Okay, so a consequence of the fact that we have this ecosystem is now that we live in this Lego brick wall where we are the Lego people here, and the little Lego bricks are the different modules or the different bits from the ecosystem that we take and we build together. And this is actually quite somehow a freeing experience, because you can match and choose, pick and play, and the world is our oyster. We can do whatever we want. And because of Hugging Face, everything is like in the same environment, in the same ecosystem. And so I'm not the only one talking about modules. This has been a big deal since actually 2016, where Jacob Andreas actually talked about neural module networks. And this is a very elegant paper. I do recommend that you go and read it. It's beautiful. The whole point is you learn these modules from training. That's not what I'm saying. This approach actually did not work that well because you don't have a training signal, and how do you percolate gradients and how do you specialize the modules. But he was already back then talking about modules. So then there's other people that actually say, look, we cannot have this monolith, this big black box that we don't know how to deal with. We better create an ecosystem, and we build the ecosystem, and then once we have the ecosystem, we actually know what we're doing. There's people that say modularity comes in the parameters, so they want to specialize parameters for different tasks, and of course, there is this big trend of now having an LLM agent, so you have the LLM, but the LLM calls different tools, and this is another instantiation of modularity, where the LLM knows that it cannot do the task, or if you want to do calculations, for example, why should you do this in your parameters? You just call a calculator, and the calculator knows how to do this better than the LLM. Okay, so here's a quote, and I think this is what's happening right now. So the quote is from Marcel Proust, who said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." So fundamentally, the landscape of natural language processing has not changed, but we have been given these new eyes. And what can you do with these new eyes? So the rest of the talk is how we adapt our vision to using this ecosystem. And there is three things I will talk about. How using these new eyes, you can actually decompose the problem in a way that makes sense. And with this way, you deal with a challenging problem that you couldn't have done before. We can impose structure in the representation space, so we decompose the first bit of the talk, we will decompose the task such that we can use modules. The second bit of the talk, we enforce structure in the representation space because it makes sense for the problem. And finally, we do both. We impose structure in the representation, but also we decompose the problem. And all these approaches are modular in a sense. Okay. So let's look at the first problem, which is the structure in the problem decomposition. And for the first part, I will talk about how we summarize TV shows. Okay, let me be a bit more specific. It's not any TV shows, it is soap operas. I know the audience is young, but I'll just try it anyway. How many of you have heard of this soap opera called The Bold and the Beautiful? Oh, wow. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's great. So, The Bold and the Beautiful, for those who did not raise your hands, is an American soap opera. It's the longest lasting soap opera in the US to date. I think it's year 40 or something. So they've been running. These are the original actors here when they were young and beautiful. Right? This is Stephanie. Somebody knows actually who they are. This is Stephanie. I don't know the other people. Eric, this is Eric. Okay, so Jan is here, knows. If you have any questions, yes. So this soap opera is about this family, okay? And we want to be able to summarize what happens in one episode. Episodes are 30 to 40 minutes long, and I will read to you a human summary. So a human has actually gone and told us what's happening, and I will read this to you to see that the task is far from trivial. And a lot of things happen in one episode, and a lot of things do not happen. So they have to keep the viewers to keep back watching. It's a soap opera. Remember, every day of the week, Monday to Friday, there is an episode. So a lot of things have to happen, but they're all like nonsense. Okay, nothing major happens because, you know, the viewer, so it's very difficult. It's like describing someone's life. So Ridge continues to beg Brooke to reconsider her decision to leave Forrester. Forrester is this family company, as Stephanie continues to voice her opinion. At Marone, I don't know what Marone is, Taylor pays Nick a visit. Nick is still angry about what Taylor implied when she disclosed that Brooke and Rich slept together. Taylor tries to apologize and asks if things are right between them. No. The colors are the different characters, so many characters. And we have to extract what's happening from these things and summarize it from the video in human language. So before the LLMs and before the ecosystem, if somebody told me, can you summarize videos, I would say, you are drunk. It's not possible. But now we are sort of glimpsing, little like, it's becoming possible. You see, it's not perfect. Okay. So let me explain why the task is, a bit more formally, why the task is challenging. It is an instance of dialogue summarization, because in these soap operas, there is no explosions, there is no car chases, there is people talking, and the scenery changes, and they talk again, and they are like in a different place, and it's a lot of blah, blah, blah dialogue. So the videos can be up to 60 minutes, they're very long, 6,000 tokens, complex semantics, because the way they're presented, the camera cuts through one scene and then goes to another scene, and these scenes are far apart. I'll show an example in the next slide. And the sources that we have to take into account to solve our problem are video, language, and audio. So all of it together. So it's a multimodal problem. And of course, we have the other problem that how many videos can we see? How many of these soap operas can the model actually see to be trained on? So it's a data scarcity problem. We will never find enough. There aren't that many anyway. And of course, once you generated a summary, there is this is the real, absolutely very big problem. How do you evaluate? Can I ask like all these people, if I have like 1,000 soap operas in my test set, can I ask real humans? Can I subject them to actually watch the videos and then ask them, is my summary correct or not? No way. This is like terrible. I don't have money to pay them, and I would not do it to them. So we have to come up with automatic ways of actually knowing whether the summaries are better or not. Okay. So before I describe what we do, I'll just show you a little bit how the data looks like. So we have the transcript here. Okay, this is dialogue. We get the video from YouTube, and we have a human-produced summary. And I'm not going to go into the details as to how we have to take this video and pre-process it. We have to extract the keyframes. We have to do some video processing. And then when we get the keyframes, we have to align them with the dialogue so that we know that what we are saying and what we are seeing are in sync. There's ways of doing this. I can answer questions, but assume this is done to a good standard. And then we have the summary. And this is now what we are trying to do. We are trying to take this video and the transcript as input and output the summary. Okay, and remember I told you about the ecosystem, so we're not going to use all of the ecosystem. We're going to just look at the LLM here. With some prompt engineering, you'll see where the prompt engineering goes. We're going to use some smaller models, some fine-tuning and evaluation. So this is a trimmed-down version of the ecosystem. Now, let me tell you how we use these modules and how we break down and impose structure in this problem. So these are, what you're seeing here are the keyframes from the video aligned with the transcript. And you see it's, it's a sequence. So the first thing we will do is we will actually break it down into scenes, okay? So here, these lines seem to indicate that I've identified the scenes. So the scene breaks. And the scenes are important because they are semantic. Like, ideally, you should be expressing what's happening in every scene. Now, another thing we need to do, if you notice here, and this happens very frequently, some stuff takes place in this setting, which is a police station, and then some other stuff takes place in the hospital, and then we go back to the police station, and then we go back to the hospital. So it's non-linear, and what we're going to do is we're going to reorder them so that our model is able to understand what's happening. So we will get a new order where everything takes place in the police station, and then everything is taking place in the hospital, okay? And there is algorithms for doing these things. And then, once I've done the reordering, then I can actually do some modeling. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to describe the scene in natural language. So you can use an NLM that tells you Emily is upset, she hurt Rosanna, she's afraid of being arrested. This is what we will get from a language model that summarizes the dialogue. And we will also get a language and vision LLM to tell us what we are seeing. And we are sort of transposing the computer vision problem into a language problem. So here, the LLM that has seen a lot of video will say, Emily and Hal talk at a police station. Or Hal watches Emily push a woman. A doctor shows a man something. Okay? So we have preprocessed the video, we have preprocessed the text, and once we have done all that, then we can generate our summary. And the summary reads, Emily is accused of hurting Rosanna, and she doesn't pass the lie detector test at the police station. At the hospital, Ben says he saw Aaron the night of the accident, blah, blah, blah. So the summary talks about what's happening at the police station, and then what's happening at the hospital. Okay, so here's a question. And this is very important, and a lot of work is happening nowadays in NLP as to how do we evaluate the stuff. And why do we worry about evaluation so much? And this is not to talk about evaluation, but I think it's important to raise this, because LLMs and prompting are becoming part of the evaluation as well. So before the LLMs, everybody was fine-tuning on their data sets, and then you would use Rouge. Do people know what Rouge is? Rouge is good, but I'll say anyway. So Rouge is a metric that measures this lexical similarity between your predicted summary and a gold standard summary. So we take the predicted summary and we see how many trigrams or bigrams are the same against the gold. Now, what we found is if you put an LLM into the mix, the LLM is, of course, a lot more fluent, and then it cannot actually, the LLM output is such that you cannot use Rouge. So, and Rouge cannot actually tell you, because of the LLM output, whether your output is good or not. As a discriminator, it's useless. And this is well known, and in particular, if you care about whether the LLM is lying, the Rouge is not going to do anything about it. It cannot discriminate systems against factuality. And in this domain where there is a lot of events happening, we want the summary to be truthful to what we are seeing. So there's also other research that shows that the LLM outputs are preferred to human references. So they like the LLM output because it's very wordy and more fluent than the human references. So what are we going to do? Well, we can actually think a bit about the problem and see what interests us here. And what interests us here is to be precise with regards to facts, because we know that the LLM will generate fluent output, but we want it to be also correct. So what we're going to do, and I have a slide illustrating, we will measure fact-based precision and recall against gold summaries. So what is this? So fact precision measures whether the facts in the output are supported by the gold summaries. So you see in the example, there is a predicted summary in blue and a gold summary in yellow. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to extract facts from the predicted summary. And you see the font changes here. These are the facts. Bridget and Dante are planning to get married. Bridget wants to spend more time with Dante. These are just facts that we will get with an LLM. And then these facts we're going to check against the gold summary to see if they are supported by the gold summary. And red denotes they're not supported, whereas blue they are. So by supported, I mean entailed. So if these are entailed by the gold summary or not. And then we're going to do the same in the opposite direction by measuring fact recall. Are the facts in the gold summary supported by the output? So we're going to do the same in reverse. Again, blue indicates yes, the fact is supported, and red is not unsupported. And then we're going to take the mean of the fact precision and recall. And this is going to be how we measure our summaries. Okay, so let me just give you an outline of the various modules we used here. So we have a scene detection algorithm that partitions the transcript into chunks. And this is not trivial to do. It has like this quite elaborate inference mechanism based on minimum description length. But anyway, we just take the transcript and partition it into scenes. Then we order the scenes, again using an algorithm based on minimum transitions between scenes. Then we have to do our visual processing, which generates the scene captions. Then we have to do our dialogue summarization. Then we take the outputs of these scene-based summaries and we integrate them into a high-level summary, and then finally we have evaluation. And prompt engineering here appears in two modules. One is the visual processing, and finally is how we extract the facts. Okay? And so we've gone through all this hassle, and you see this is, even though it's like modular, it's far from straightforwardly simple to do all of that. So how well are we doing? So I'll show you, first of all, Rouge. And Rouge 2 I show here because there have been some studies that say it tends to, all Rouge metrics correlate very poorly with human judgments, but Rouge 2 correlates less poorly. Okay? So we have Rouge here, and I want you to take a look at this. So bad systems have red in them, good systems have blue in them, so you can see how it differentiates. And there's various baselines here. For example, fine-tuning Mistral, 7B here. Some simple things like taking only the start or the end of the movie. Adapters, you fine-tune them. And Limiformer is something that takes long context into account. Modular is ours. And the references is, evaluating one human summary against the other. And if you look at Rouge, what do you observe? It paints a clear picture that our system is best, modular here, and in fact it's better than the humans. We're great, right? Okay, let's see what happens now with the fact-based metric. Completely different picture. First of all, you see that the various red or yellow systems are not that different, okay? And you see that the two best systems are this and Limiformer and ours. The difference is like 4 points. And you see that the humans are doing a lot better. And that here, this picture, I can't believe. And there is like a huge gap between what the models are doing and what the humans can do. If I had just looked at Rouge, I would have gone home. But of course, there is a lot of work to be done. Okay. So this was the first part. So we looked at the structure and the problem decomposition. Now we're going to concentrate on the structure in the representation space. And this system will not be as modular, but it's an example of how you really don't need prompting for this task. Okay. So this is about cross-lingual semantic parsing, and I'll explain what semantic parsing is and what cross-lingual is and why we want to do it. So semantic parsing traditionally is a mapping from natural language, which could be a question, into some code. Let's say it's SQL. And if you have this SQL, then you have a database at the back end. You execute your SQL against the database, and you get an answer. Okay, so, and why do you want to do that? There is a lot of companies that have very big databases, and they want to answer queries. And most humans cannot write SQL. If you see SQL, it's like lines and lines and lines of this huge code. And, you know, not everybody is proficient in formulating queries in SQL. So this is a task where you can think of it as language to code, except that we have this extra complication that we have to execute the code to get the answer. Okay? And this is a very interesting task because when people do this, for example, if you do it over the phone with a travel agent and whatnot, you have to have very fast latency. You cannot wait for the LLM to give you an answer. Decoding times have to be very, very fast. And that's why people traditionally use smaller models, although with LLMs you can kind of do it, but they are nowhere near in terms of accuracy with the smaller models. Okay. So now, this is in one language. I have, like, say, my Greek query, and I get my answer. What happens if you have a parser in one language and you want to adapt it to work for another language? Assume you're a company and you want to localize your semantic parser to another language for which there is no data. So this happens a lot, and what tends to be the case is that, you know, you say, I want to have French, German, Chinese, whatever, and in reality what you mostly have is English and nothing else, or very little data on the other language. And so what we care about now is to take what we usually have, which would be an English parser, and adapt it to the new language. Okay? So the problem here, or the task as formulated, is we need to estimate the probability of y is my output SQL, given an input language, and the D, which is my database. D is my data, not database. And we approximate this by the probability of my output, given the English and some other data. But it's always the case that the data that I will have in the other language, which is not English, and these are examples. For example, you can have a lot of data in some other language, which is not English, but for the purposes of this talk, assume I have a lot of data in English. This data will always be a lot more than whatever I can get in the other language. So, and there is another interesting thing about this kind of scenario. The LLMs cannot yet match the performance of any fine-tuned system that you may have for this task, for this cross-lingual task. So we're going to concentrate on a fine-tuned system, so there is no prompting here. And the problem of how we can get our parser to behave like English, while in fact it is seeing as an input a different language. Okay. So let me backtrack a little bit and explain why this task is hard. So if we have something like, let's look at English first. List the flights from San Francisco to Pittsburgh. What we're going to have is an encoder that encodes this natural language into some latent space, and then the decoder will read this latent space and output the SQL. Now, this hard is difficult because the SQL has to be syntactically valid. You miss one thing, you miss, for example, the star here, right? It will not execute, and you will not have the answer. The SQL also must reflect the intent. So what does the user intended to ask? You know, and the queries may be, for example, ambiguous. So it has to understand what I mean. And also, and this is a very common problem, the parser must generalize to new tables and new databases and have that capability. So it's a triple whammy here of problems all together. Now, when we take that to a different language, so we have this for English and now we're trying to get it to understand Chinese, the parser must be able to understand these questions in the other language. And of course, we don't have money to pay. I mean, if we are mega rich, we could pay, but let's assume we are not rich and we're actually poor and stingy. So we don't have, like everything you put it, we don't want to pay any money. And complex annotation is expensive for many languages. And, You may say, oh, wait a minute, all these models are trained with multiple languages, so what's the problem? Usually when I create a new language model, or, BART and BERT and all of these models are trained seeing multiple languages. But unfortunately, it has been shown that multilingual training is better for some languages, but not for others. So if you are the unlucky person whose language is not actually benefiting from multilingual training, you're not going to see anything. So we cannot just rest and assume that the model will actually know anything about the language. Okay, and to prove that point, this is how, if you take BART, which is one of the smaller models, but it is multilingual. It has seen 50 different languages, right? So this is good in theory. And you plot how the meaning of the utterance list flights from San Francisco to Pittsburgh. This is this utterance here, and these are its translations in different languages. And you see where each utterance lands in the semantic space with these squares. And what do we see? They're all over the place. Ideally, we want them to be on the same place because they express the same meaning. List flights from San Francisco to Pittsburgh. This is not so difficult. Yet, in some cases it's at the upper bit of the space, in others it's at the lower bit, and the different symbols symbolize here different languages. So this is not a good situation, and if you just assume that this is going to solve your problem, it won't, because it doesn't know a lot about meaning. So we want these dots to come closer together. Okay, so here now we have the ecosystem, and all we will do is we'll have the model, we will have the fine-tuning, we will execute the code, because by executing we know whether we are right or wrong, and we will do some evaluation, but I will not talk about evaluation. Evaluation is really executing. Okay, so how are we going to solve this? So we have to be a bit smart about this. We have a lot of English and minimal data in the other language, and we have to somehow to align these two different representations. We have to bring them, and by align I mean bring them closer together. We want the Chinese to behave more like English, where we have more data. And so we will make this cross-lingual alignment explicit. So we have to force the model somehow to do it, because BART won't do it. You saw the previous graph here. It hasn't done it. It's all over the place. So I have to be explicit and go and manipulate the structure. And to do that, we have to actually have a supervised model. We cannot prompt. So what we will do is we will impose a latent variable between my encoder and my decoder, and we will measure the distance between samples from this latent variable between the languages. There's graphs. So we have here the encoder and the decoder and the latent space in one language, in the rich language, in English. And this space is like unstructured. It's not a distribution. And if you want to minimize distances, it kind of helps to have distributions. It is all much easier. So we will impose this latent variable z between the encoder and the decoder. So I'm already introducing some structure. And my encoding now becomes an approximate conditional posterior, Q. Okay? And this is a Gaussian variable here that I'm imposing, which worked well experimentally. Okay, so once I have like this structure in English, now it's like how I'm actually going to make them aligned. I have the conditional posterior of the latent variable given the English input. And I also have the conditional posterior from the language that I want to align with, aka Chinese. And I need to bring them closer together. So what I'm going to do two things. And remember, these are now, I have this latent variable, so there are these two distributions that I need to put closer together in the space. So I will minimize first the distance between the posteriors based on the token encodings. So I'm going to minimize the distance of the encodings at the token level, so think of it as individual words, and also between the languages. So this is between the marginal posteriors. So I will have in my objective two terms. One, make the tokens be closer together. Two, make the languages be closer together. And this is what we call Minotaur. The students lately, my students, have taken to naming all their models with Greek ancient myth characters. So there is Minotaur, and there is Hero, and there is Zeus, and soon they will run out. Anyway, so this is now Minotaur, which the objective is like this conditional and marginal latent variables, and you're trying to bring them together. Okay, let me show you some results. And the first thing that I'm going to show you is, what if you are not stingy and you have a lot of money and you pay for translators? Okay? We pay. We get as much as English. So what I show here, gold, is what happens when you have professional translation and you just fine-tune your model. Okay, 72, across like all these languages. And I realized when I gave this talk earlier, somebody raised their hand and they said, well, you're talking about low resource languages, but I see here French, Portuguese, Spanish, German. These are not low resource languages. And it's true, they're not low resource, but you can swap them and put in there whatever low resource language you have. We are assuming that we don't have data in these languages to run the experiments. It turns out that Greek is not low resource either, by the way. I looked at before coming to the talk. It's like number 20 in terms of how much of the web is with Greek. It's like position 20, so not so bad. But yeah, there's worse. Okay, so if we have translations, it's 72.9. If we do some tricks like we translate the trainings test, or we translate the test set. These are like baselines that people use in machine translation, and they're very lazy. You just solve the problem via machine translation. You don't do as well as paying professional translators. If we use other methods like Reptile, Reptile is a method that allows you to generalize by clever training with batches. So this is a different approach to Minotaur, where we explicitly manipulate the structure. And so if we use this Minotaur with 1% of examples from our training data, so with 45 examples, we go up to 71.3. So that means we only have translated 45 examples. This has translated a lot more, 5,000. Okay, so we have a little data and we go up to 71.3. When we get 5% of our data, so 224 examples, you see already we approach, well, we're on par with translating everything. And when you have 10%, you exceed the benefits of the translation. Why? Because you actually have imposed structure, and the model is doing what it's supposed to do. You manipulated the space. And you may say, oh yeah, these numbers, they're not very different. I mean, they are different, they're all significant, but what's the important point is that the space has changed. So this is my graph from before, list flights from San Francisco to Pittsburgh, and you see now that if you go into the embedding space, they've all landed in the same dot. That means that the two spaces are aligned. Well, not two, there's many spaces here for all of the languages.
Just so I understand, I understand why between different languages there is discrepancy, but why are there multiple dots for one language, for English, for example? Shouldn't they all be on the same spot? This is different. We're asking the same question, right? This flights from San Francisco to Pittsburgh.
Yes, but
just one example. Why do we have multiple dots for English or for any other language?
there is multiple, because there is more examples. To get these plots, we are like aggregating many examples. So these are for some other utterance here, right? These are the utterance for this here. These are other utterances that are in different parts of the space.
It's text, right? So this is a encoding of text, it's not direct from speech.
Yes. So these are different meanings, right? It's like all the tokens that the model has learned, and then we take their vectors and we do dimensionality reduction, and these are different dimensions of the space for different tokens, and that's why you get many. And this, you see where the languages are almost all together in the same space for different tokens. So here they all land together. This is our utterance on this space. These are other utterances, and you get these clusters, which means that the spaces are more aligned. Right?
Yeah. That goes back to aligning between languages, but maybe I'm missing something. I just don't understand why we have multiple points for one particular language.
Because it has multiple tokens, yes.
It's different flights.
And it's different flights.
It's other places as well. On this chart, it's not just San Francisco, it's more.
Yes. Yes. And come afterwards. Okay. Right. But good. Paying attention. That's very good. Are there any, since I've stopped, are there any other questions? Yes.
So I was curious, are we not, in this approach, are we not taking the problem of having, in open source languages where we have data sparsity examples, right? Is it not much harder to approximate accurately the posterior distribution?
Of course.
To English, right? So you've mapped the problem to a different space, but you have fewer data to actually compute those parameters accurately.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question I'll repeat because he didn't have a mic. The question was, you are reformulating the problem and you're telling us now that you're bringing the data you're bringing the data with a low resource closer to English, but actually you may have a harder problem. That's the question, because you don't have enough parameters to estimate how well this is done. It is true, but also I can play with the latent variable Z, which I did not actually talk at all about this. So the latent variable has parameters. I can manipulate those. I can bring the space together. I can run some experiments. So I have more freedom and more parameters to play with, which in some sense may make the problem harder, but it is not so fitting, like we are not overfitting to this few data points. You may say this maybe for this here, where you have 1%, but 5% it's enough. These models actually know a lot about embeddings. What they don't know is about Chinese, and we're sort of cramming Chinese and fooling them by trying to make Chinese closer to English. So yes, in the limit you are right, but we have not seen empirically that this happens, that we cannot actually parameterize or estimate these models.
Thank you.
In different languages, there are sometimes very subtle changes in the meaning. And so, although like this is like really cool that it was possible at all, but I'm assuming that it should be easy to like jailbreak such like similar representations, because there will be words and concepts in some languages which cannot be mapped to any other concept in other languages.
Beautiful question. Okay. So the question is, you know, you do that, that's okay, but what if you have a language which has concepts that do not map at all to English? What do you do then, right? I mean, how would you bring that language closer to English if the space is not? We haven't dealt with this. We assume that, you know, you have the same queries. You're absolutely right. Now, it is the case that we do have some training data. There is no magic here. We fine-tune. So if that were the case, this is where you should spend all your annotation budget. You cannot do it. Or you can have workarounds such as, you know, you sort of paraphrase this. You paraphrase it in a way that can map to English, something like this. But yeah, this would be a case that this model cannot handle well. Okay, I have one more example and then you can ask me more questions. Okay, so we talked about structure in the problem decomposition, structure in the representation space. So now we are going to look at something which is like the best problem. We will change the space and the problem decomposition. Okay, and the task we have is opinion aggregation. And I'll explain what this is. So opinion aggregation is something that would be very useful, but we don't actually have a lot of tools that do this. So we all look at reviews. These are reviews about the Hilton Miami downtown, and in many cases there is thousands of reviews. I don't know about the Hilton Miami downtown, but I wanted to buy an iPhone, well, secondhand, but nevertheless, I realized so many iPhones, and then I was looking, and 10 million reviews, and I cannot tell, whatever. So we want some tool that will take these reviews and will actually tell us what the most popular ones are. Of course, maybe we want the unpopular ones as well, but in the limit, we want something that tells us, here's what most people think, here's what people flag. And in this particular example, the Miami hotel, a review summary might look like the hotel's location is great, clean and spacious rooms, friendly staff but slow check-in, expensive parking. This is important if you have a car and you're in America where they all have cars. Okay, so we want to summarize the most popular opinions found in the reviews of an entity. And the entity here is the hotel. The entity in my case was the iPhone. Okay, now, why is this problem hard? As I said, there can be thousands of reviews. In the limit, we want the summaries to be personalized. So for example, for me, for the iPhone, I usually, they don't last. Somehow, there's always water on them, and they die. So I wanted to know which of these iPhones actually can be water resistant. This was a very difficult problem, and it was not stated in the review. So this is personalized to me. And the output, and this is a real bummer, and this is why you actually don't see Amazon to use this technology, is you want the output to be evidence-based, and by that I mean A, it cannot lie, B, you should go to the input and check it out. So if you want more information about what is said, you have to have the reviews in hand and go and look at the evidence. And so this is kind of difficult. So how people have dealt with this problem before, they sort of trained systems by doing this clever trick. I have 1 million reviews, I'll sample one, I will treat it as my target, and then I'll fine-tune a system. And this may kind of work, or in some way I will get pseudo-data, I will get training data by making some approximations, and create the silver standard summaries, and I will train my system. And you can see why this can very easily go wrong, because all the summaries will sound like reviews, because you are really getting a review and treating it as a summary. Okay, so here's our ecosystem again. So in this case now, we will focus on having an LLM interact with something external. It says here external knowledge base. In our case, the knowledge base are the reviews, and it will be a knowledge base, or at least an index of sorts, because we will pre-process the reviews in a way that can help us summarize them in an evidence-based fashion, okay? So let's see how we're going to do this. So there's some criteria we want to have. So first of all, we want to identify what ideas are popular. And by popular, think frequent. What are the things that come up often in a product? So we need to have a discrete encoding so that we can count them. This is kind of important. If I want popular reviews, I want to be able to say 100 people say this, or 100 times this is mentioned. The other important thing about this is that the opinions have to have the same semantics, irrespective of the surface form. So if I say the food sucked versus the food was horrible, I mean the same thing. The food is bad. So the model has to be able to abstract from the surface form and get at the meaning of these utterances. So we will have to encode them hierarchically. Why? Because I want very general statements about things to be higher in the hierarchy, in the semantic space, which I'm going to make it a hierarchy because I want it to have some structure. And so general statements will be on the top of the hierarchy, and more specific things will be at the bottom. And we also want to generate these coherent and nice-looking summaries, so we will actually have our encoding, we will have a way of retrieving things from our encoding, and then I will give these sentences to an LLM, a big LLM, which will actually generate the summary for me. So now, what I've done here, again, we have all these modules, and I have disassociated the problem of creating a summary from the problem of creating a representation for the thing I want a summary of. So all the work will be on the representation. How do you get this structured hierarchy of opinions? And then once I have this, I will interface it with an LLM and I will get a summary, and I don't have to worry about how to get the summary. Okay, so here's how this index, and again, I'm not going to go into the details, but I'm very happy to answer questions. So given a lot of data about reviews, and this is completely unsupervised, we don't need to do anything, aside from being a bit clever as to how we learn this index. So I'm going to break down the reviews into sentences. We enjoyed the meal, the dessert was delicious, and then I will try to learn a way of representing these sentences. And you can think of it as hierarchical clustering. So I cluster these reviews in this latent space, and I want them to be a hierarchy so the general statements are higher and specific ones are lower in this tree. So this index that I'm learning is an encoder of these sentences. And this is a huge index that is a huge tree that has all the representations of all the sentences in my training data. And this is contrastively trained, which is very difficult to do with very big language models. Anyway, so I have this big index, and then I get some sentences at test time, and these new sentences now, I will map them into my index, and I will retrieve the sentences that are part of this cluster in my hierarchy that are important for my task. So here, you see in the index that we enjoyed the meal in this latent hierarchy maps here, right? It goes from the top to the bottom. The dessert was delicious is the same part of the space. The steak is very good, again, the same. They all map to the same subpath. Nice decor goes a different direction because it means something else. Now at test time, we enjoyed the meal, dessert was delicious, the steak was very good. I'm going to actually go and see where these sentences map into the hierarchy. This is the cluster that talks about good food. It has nothing to do with nice decor. And then finally, once I retrieve these sentences that mean the same thing, I will pass them on to the LLM and get good food as output. So is this kind of clear? This is the point in the talk where I kind of lose the audience because there is a lot going on. You have to keep it. This is a latent big tree hierarchy that we learned, so we have this encoder. And then once we have a new thing tested, we have to count which clusters are more popular. So this is the more popular cluster. So we'll talk about the food being good. And you can talk about many things in this, depending on popularity. You can rank them because you have a discrete encoding. Okay, so because we have this flexibility in the structure in the space, we can actually do multiple things with the summaries. We can assume we have these three clusters, so we don't need to do anything. We can just extract things. Dessert was delicious, the pool was nice, the rooms are awful. Or we could summarize per cluster, good food, great pool, awful rooms, or take them all together as a big document and give them to the LLM. So we have some flexibility in how to present the summary. And of course, there is a degree here of very factual to less factual. So here, if I'm extracting, I'm not lying. Here, I may be lying, but it's, per cluster. And here I put everything in a document and try to have a summary. Here the summary will be coherent. Here it won't be, but maybe it will be more accurate. So whatever is important to you, it's flexible. Okay, so what are the modules? We have to learn this index. So an encoder will map in single sentence to a path through a discrete hierarchy. And like I said, this is contrastively trained so as to bring semantically similar sentences together. Because without this contrastive training, how will the model know that good meal and nice food are the same? Then we have this cluster retrieval, which identifies which parts in the hierarchy are popular and retrieves sentences that are mapped to the highest subpaths, highest scoring subpaths. And then we have the summary generation. And here we have one prompt, one silly prompt. It's zero shot. You have a big model, 7B, or, well, not so big, but big. And you just get the summary. And I have one graph for this problem. And this is the accuracy. And by accuracy, we mean does it lie or not? And overall, how much people prefer the system. And these are human judgments. So this is relative preference. If you see negative numbers, it's bad. They don't prefer the system. If you see positive, it's better. You can see that the red clusters are all negative. The blue ones are a bit better. There is various baselines here. Our system is this one called Hercules. You see the Greek names. And the second best is Mistral, just zero shot. So Hercules is a lot more accurate because it uses the information. We went through all this hassle. Overall, again, they prefer, what do they prefer? Blue, hero. So sorry. Okay, let's do that again. Right. This blue thing is hero, is what I described. Hero document, which means that it aggregates all the sentences and creates an abstractive summary. The blue one is Mistral, and everything else are baselines. I can answer questions if you like. And the same here. What is shocking about this graph is that we have gone through a lot of hassle to actually make this valuable. Without any effort, you get the second best system, which is Mistral. So the message is not don't do any effort. The message is we have to make the effort to improve our systems. Okay, so I'm done. So I'll just recap. So in the video summarization, from our ecosystem, we had like these different modules and prompt engineering, and we looked at evaluation. Then we moved on to look at code execution and fine-tuning, and then finally what happens when we have an external knowledge base. And I will leave you with some thoughts as to why ecosystems are important. This I copied from my daughter's biology book. So in the UK, you are not only doing biology about the human body, but they talk about ecosystems and organisms and whatnot. So it says ecosystems provide essential services such as clean air and water, nutrient cycling, pollination, and climate regulation. They're also supported by diversity, which is crucial for the stability and resilience of natural systems. Additionally, ecosystems contribute to human well-being by providing food, medicine, and recreational opportunities. Protecting and preserving ecosystems is vital for the health of the planet and all its inhabitants. And this maps completely into our NLP universe. So ecosystems provide essential services such as libraries, tools, leaderboards, collaboration, and fair use. They also support diversity, which is crucial for our field. They contribute to our well-being by providing choice, knowledge, and maybe recreational opportunities. And finally, they protect our community, is vital for the health of our community and its members. Finally, I asked GPT, what do you think about the future of NLP? And it came up with this poem. Disclaimer, it's a terrible poem, but I'm going to read this out to you. So it said, in the digital expanse where algorithms dwell, God, future whispers in the circuits, a story to tell. NLP evolves, understanding grows wide, in the dance of zeros and ones, it finds its stride. Please. Languages merge in the neural net's core. So how do they merge? Who knows? This is about my semantic parsing example. Boundaries blur, meaning explores. God. As machines comprehend the human sigh, the future of NLP reaches for the sky. So, okay, we can reach for the sky, and I'll leave you here. I should thank, when I gave this talk at EACL, I never thanked all the people who actually contributed to this talk. So now, these are my lovely students and collaborators, and I will stop here. I don't know what time it is, and I'll take questions. Are we okay with time? Okay, thank you very much.
I had a question about the first part, about the summarization of TV shows. So I found it very interesting when you showed the examples of the basically non-entailed mistakes that LLMs make. Have you looked a bit closer into those mistakes? In the sense that I think they can come from different sources in this multi-modality setting. So, for example, how many of those mistakes are simply hallucinations? So, which ones are problems with coreference resolution?
That's a very good question. Yes, yeah. I'll answer. Okay, so coreference, very important, and it screws it up. So it will start talking about one character and then refer to the character as she. So this is the most important problem. Character, keeping it coherence is another one, like talking about the character coherently throughout, which relates to your coreference. The computer vision module is very non-specific, so it says a man is talking to a man. So then we have to do some backwards, which I did not talk about, mapping these men to the actual characters, which again is a problem. There is more problems, like it gets the events right, but not who is doing, because it lacks proper understanding, who is doing what to him. So it may mention, for example, a killing, but it not be the killing, like it will attribute the event to different characters. So yes, a lot of work to do there, a lot.
So me, okay. So in your last example, you mentioned how you cluster semantically some sentences and then you feed them to an LLM using zero shot and then
yes.
you ask it to summarize it.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, how does that compare to retrieval augmented generation, where you just give it all the reviews, you encode them in a knowledge graph or whatever, and then you feed the representation as opposed to the plain text?
Okay, so that's a good question. So we don't have a query. So if we had a query, we could have done retrieval. So we sort of backward
engineer. The query could be summarize the reviews.
If you take all these reviews, so they did not fit into Mistral. That is another problem. And we have baselines actually in the paper I did not talk about. So you cut them. They don't fit. Like you have like 5,000, 8,000 reviews, and you know the context length is not that big. And so you give them and you summarize and you say summarize these reviews. It can do it, and in fact this is what Mistral, we have given Mistral, the baseline system has access. It's a RAG type thing, so it sees reviews up to a point, and I should have said this actually. And you see, it's like 30, it's not a Strawman, it's actually quite strong. It's here, 35 against 57.
So that particular system there uses a RAG as to kind of summarize the reviews. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That answers the question. So basically, it's not as good as what
no,
you're doing.
But it's not that bad because all the others are a lot worse.
Okay, thank you.
My question is also about the first task and the evaluation of it. I found the new method quite non-intuitive because if I understood it correctly, we are dividing the original task into two smaller tasks, which is first of all fact generation from text, and then fact checking, entailment checking. And I mean, to me, it seems like we again are coming back to comparing text between two different kinds. And so we should run into the same problems like with n-gram precision and everything. But if we are saying that if we do LLM evaluation and it overcomes such problems, why can't we just, instead of having two separate steps, just ask the LLM to rate how the summary is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So you just say, is this summary better than the other? It cannot do it reliably. We tried. So one way of doing this is you give the gold standard summary, and then you ask the LLM, compare this generated predicted summary against the gold standard summary. And it doesn't correlate at all with human judgments. I think the task is very difficult, even for the LLM. So we break it down to these facts, and then it is more manageable. You can at least, measure the facts. And also the humans, we did these experiments because if you do LLM-based evaluation, you always have to say they correlate with human. The humans can reliably correlate then with the LLM, whereas in your case, it was all over the place. Too hard. But maybe, in a few years' time, maybe. This is where the whole field is going. Like, you get the LLM to evaluate things.
And I think that's time. I think we're already quarter past.
Oh, God.
So.
And now you have the sponsor, right? Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.